The storm had been hunting him since daybreak. Wind howled through the pines like a wolf pack closing in, the sky a bruised slate of swirling clouds that dropped snow in angry fists. Wesley Brooks pulled his duster tighter around him, his gloved hands stiff on the reins as his horse trudged through knee-deep drifts. Each step forward was a gamble. The trail had long since vanished beneath the white, and the mountains around him had grown unfamiliar, ghostly shapes in a frozen world. 3 days in the saddle, no sleep to speak of, a crust of jerky, a few mouthfuls of creek water boiled over a fire that barely held. He should have turned back, but turning back meant giving up, and Wesley Brooks didn't give up. Not until he saw her. At first it was nothing, just a shape slumped against a grey boulder where the wind had carved a shallow hollow. Could have been a dead deer, maybe a cougar, sheltering from the gale. He might have passed it by if not for the flicker, something too still, too quiet in a storm that screamed. He reined in his horse. The animal snorted and stamped, nostrils flaring. Wesley swung down, boots sinking into the snow. The wind slapped at him like it knew he was making a mistake. It wasn't an animal. It was a girl, a young woman, maybe 19, native. Navajo by the dress, thin deerskin with hand-stitched beadwork that might have been beautiful in a different season. Now it was soaked through and clung to her like paper. Her skin was blue at the lips, her hands curled into fists of ice. She didn't move when he knelt beside her. "Jesus," he muttered. He touched her shoulder. Nothing. He brushed snow from her face, and finally her eyelids fluttered. Deep brown eyes met his, alert, aware, but not afraid, just tired. As if she'd already said goodbye to the world and was surprised it hadn't left yet. Wesley had seen death. Too much of it. In war. In bar fights. In cattle drives gone wrong. He knew the look people got just before they slipped away. She was close, a minute, maybe 2, before the cold claimed her for good. He should have walked away. That was the code out here. Don't meddle in things you don't understand, especially not when it came to native folk. Even good intentions could end in blood. But damn it, she was barely more than a child, and Wesley had lived with too many ghosts to let another one settle on his shoulders. He dropped to one knee, yanked the roll from his saddle, and pulled free the thick wool blanket tucked inside. It was old, blue and grey, frayed at the edges. His grandmother had made it for him before the fever took her. It had kept him warm in mountain passes, desert nights, and God-forsaken storms like this. Now it was hers. He wrapped it around her shoulders and tucked it in tight. She stirred slightly, her fingers twitching as if trying to hold on to something. Her breathing stuttered, then evened out. Her eyes stayed on his face the entire time, studying, not pleading. "You'll be all right," he said, unsure if she understood a word. He built a fire fast, fingers fumbling with flint and steel. The wood was wet, the wind fierce, but eventually flame took root and began to grow. He coaxed it higher, fed it slivers of bark until the little circle of heat pushed back the storm. She sat up slowly, shivering so hard her teeth clicked. Her lips moved, and after a few tries she said one word, "Maya." It was quiet, like a name she wasn't sure she was allowed to say. Wesley nodded. "Maya, that your name?" She nodded once. He offered her a strip of jerky. She took it with trembling hands and ate slowly, eyes never leaving his. Not suspicious. Just watching. As if trying to remember every line of his face, every crease in his coat. He watched her right back. Who was she? How had she ended up here alone in a storm that could kill a man twice her size? The questions nagged, but there was no time to ask. He had a fire to tend, a horse to calm, and a growing awareness that this moment, this choice, was going to matter more than he could yet understand. They spent the night huddled behind the rocks. The fire flickered and hissed, and the wind kept screaming, but they were warm, or warm enough to survive. Wesley didn't sleep. He watched the fire, then her. Maya leaned against the rock wall, blanket wrapped tightly around her, eyes closed but not asleep. Like him, she was listening, to the wind, the forest, to whatever fate might be creeping their way with the snow. At one point, she murmured something in Navajo. Wesley didn't understand, but the sound was soft, full of weight, maybe a prayer, maybe a warning. At dawn, the storm broke like a fever. The sky turned from iron to pale ash, and snowflakes drifted rather than cut. Maya stood shakily, holding the blanket around her shoulders. She took a step toward him and tried to hand it back. Wesley shook his head. "No, keep it. You need it," she insisted, clearly upset, speaking fast now, her tone urgent. She gestured from the blanket to herself, then to him, her brows knit in confusion. Or maybe fear? Wesley just smiled, trying to calm her. "It's just a blanket," he said, mounting up. "Be safe, Maya." And with that, he rode off, into what he believed was the end of a strange encounter. But as the blanket slipped around Maya's shoulders and her eyes followed him until the mist swallowed his silhouette, something else was already in motion. Something that didn't care what Wesley meant by his kindness. Because in her world, giving a blanket was never just a gift. It was a vow. And by sunset, her people would come looking for the man who had unknowingly married one of their own. The road to the trading post felt longer than it should have. Wesley's horse, a bay gelding named Smoke, moved slower than usual, hooves crunching into crusted snow that hadn't yet begun to melt. The sky had turned pale, but held the memory of last night's storm. Wesley kept looking back without meaning to. He couldn't see the hollow behind the rocks anymore. Maya had disappeared into the whiteness, and so had the strange silence that had hung between them. He didn't know why he couldn't shake the image of her face, the sharp cheekbones, dark eyes watching him like she saw something he hadn't seen in himself in years. Maybe it was the quiet way she had accepted the help. No fear, no begging, just presence. Like she belonged to that storm, and he'd just stepped into her world for a moment before being spit back out. By mid-afternoon, Wesley reached the valley where the trading post squatted between two stands of pine. A crooked fence circled it, more for show than protection. Smoke curled from a chimney atop the stone building, and someone had nailed a freshly skinned rabbit to the side of the barn for drying. Inside, it was warm and loud. Wood creaked under boot heels, and the thick smell of coffee, pipe tobacco, and damp wool filled the room. 3 men sat around a battered table playing cards, a bottle of whiskey at the center. One of them looked up and gave a low whistle. "Well, I'll be damned," the man said. "Wesley Brooks come crawling out of the snow like some kind of frost ghost." Wesley shrugged off his coat and stomped the snow from his boots. "Morning, Murphy." Murphy, the grizzled trader who ran the outpost, tossed a tin cup toward him. "You look half dead. Coffee's hot, but strong enough to strip paint." Wesley caught the cup and poured from the blackened pot near the hearth. The first sip nearly burned his throat, but it did the trick. Life came crawling back into his fingers and cheeks. "Where you been riding from?" one of the card players asked. A wiry man with twitchy eyes and a scar that ran down his jaw like a bolt of lightning. "North Trail," Wesley said. 3 days back through the pass." "You're lucky to be breathing," Murphy muttered. "Storm like that should have dropped you in a ditch." "Almost did," Wesley replied, then hesitated. The image of Maya huddled in the snow flickered through his mind. He thought of telling them, but the words sat wrong in his throat. "Didn't see much worth talking about," he finished. The scarred man leaned back in his chair, cocking his head. "No trouble? No Apache? None that wanted to be seen?" A heavy silence followed. "Folks say they've been moving through the canyons again," Murphy said, lowering his voice. There's tension brewing. Something about a family crossing the tribal boundary, got chased off with arrows in their wagons. Hell, the twitchy man muttered, spitting into a dented brass spittoon. Animals? And every last one of them. Wesley's jaw twitched. He said nothing. Murphy refilled his coffee. You're welcome to bunk here tonight, but I'd be moving on at first light if I were you. Heard drums last night in the East Hills. And when drums start, trouble follows. Wesley nodded, but said nothing. Instead, he walked to the window and looked out. That's when he heard it. A low, steady rhythm, like a heartbeat, echoing through the trees. Soft at first, almost hidden beneath the wind. But then it came again. Clearer this time. A pattern, not just noise, communication. He turned from the window slowly. You hear that? The card game stopped. The men looked around, suddenly still. There it is again, the scarred man whispered. The sound drifted across the valley, distant but insistent. Wesley set down his cup. A cold knot settled in his stomach. The rhythm was purposeful. Not random, not idle ceremony. It was calling, or warning. He remembered Maya's eyes, the urgency in her voice when she tried to give the blanket back, her hand movements pointing to herself, then to him, then to the blanket. She hadn't been thanking him. She'd been trying to tell him something serious, something he hadn't understood. Murphy stood and moved toward the rifles mounted above the bar. Might be nothing, but I ain't taking chances. Wesley nodded. I'll take that room you mentioned. That night, the fire burned low in the stove as Wesley lay in a narrow bunk, unable to sleep. Outside, the drums started again, closer now. He could feel them in his chest, like thunder without lightning. And then something stranger happened. He thought he heard his name. Not in English, not even spoken, but in the rhythm. The beat changed briefly, and his gut twisted. It was like his body understood something his brain couldn't explain. He sat up in bed. Outside his window, shadows moved among the trees. Not deer, not wind. Purposeful. Watching. A smoke, his horse, stirred in the stable. Wesley heard him whinny softly. He got dressed, belt tightened, revolver strapped on. Before dawn, the drums stopped. But the silence that followed was worse. No birds, no wind. Just a dead, heavy quiet that clung to everything. When he stepped out to check on Smoke, Murphy was already up, rifle in hand, eyes sharp. They're out there, Murphy said. Can't see 'em, but I feel 'em. Wesley scanned the trees. No movement, but the feeling was real, like standing in front of a loaded rifle, waiting for it to go off. I'm riding out, Wesley said, voice low. Murphy didn't argue. You'd best be careful, friend. Wesley saddled Smoke, adjusted his coat, and started toward the trail. His breath fogged the morning air. He rode slow. No sudden movements, hands visible. Half a mile down the trail, they stepped into view. 7 of them, Apache warriors, tall, still, horses painted for ceremony or war. It was hard to say. They didn't raise weapons, just blocked the path. One of them stepped forward, older, his face lined with years, his shirt adorned with beads and bone. Behind him came another figure. Maya, wrapped in the same blanket Wesley had given her. She walked past the warriors without fear, her eyes never leaving Wesley. The older man spoke in Navajo, his tone grave and certain. Maya translated. My grandfather says you have claimed me as your wife. Wesley froze. What? He managed, the blood draining from his face. I tried to tell you, Maya said. In our ways, a man who gives his blanket to a woman, He declares his intention to keep her warm, to protect her, to provide for her. That is marriage. Wesley looked at her, then at the blanket. His grandmother's gift, a simple act of kindness, now a bond, a vow. His voice broke as he spoke. That's not what I meant. Maya didn't flinch. Intentions matter less than actions. Behind her, the warriors waited. And the old man, her grandfather, narrowed his eyes. He spoke again, firm and without anger. Maya looked at Wesley. He says, now you must choose. Prove your honor, or pay for your mistake with blood. And from the look in her eyes, Wesley knew this wasn't just a misunderstanding. It was a reckoning. Wesley didn't move. His breath came shallow, not from the cold, but from the weight of the moment pressing against his chest like a boulder. The blanket he had given without thought, an instinct born from decency, now hung from Maya's shoulders like a wedding cloak. It caught the early sun, casting a dull blue shimmer over her frame. And in her eyes there wasn't hope or relief, just a deep, quiet certainty. The old man, Elan, Maya had called him, stood like a stone carved from the mountain itself. His voice came again, sharp and measured. The younger warriors behind him didn't speak. They didn't need to. The silence between their breaths was more dangerous than any drawn rifle. Maya stepped closer, just enough for Wesley to see the tightness in her jaw. She was nervous, maybe even afraid, but she was also resolute. "My grandfather says you must answer," she said softly. "If you meant to marry me, then we return to our people. If not—" She didn't finish the sentence, and she didn't have to. The meaning hung between them like smoke. "I didn't know," Wesley said, voice rough. "Where I'm from, giving someone a blanket means you're trying to keep them alive, not promise forever." Maya nodded once, but there was no retreat in her expression. "You acted with your heart, and our traditions, they don't ask for permission when action speaks louder." One of the younger warriors shifted his stance. His hand moved to the hilt of a blade, not threatening, but waiting. Ellen's eyes narrowed. He said something else, short, firm. Maya translated, her voice dipping. "He asks, would you have given your blanket to a dying man from our tribe?" Wesley's throat tightened. The answer came before he could stop it. "No," he admitted. "I probably wouldn't have." Maya didn't flinch, but the old man nodded like the answer didn't surprise him. "He says this proves you saw me as a woman first," Maya said, her voice barely more than a whisper. "Not an enemy. And that shows honor. But honor must be lived, not just felt." Another man stepped forward then, tall, younger than Alan, but older than the rest. He had sharp eyes and a knife strapped to his thigh. His gaze was harder, his voice quicker. Whatever he said made Maya's posture stiffen. "That's Kuruk," she said, not quite looking at Wesley. "He has asked for my hand many times. He believes this is all a trick." Wesley didn't need a translator to understand Kuruk's tone. The man stared at him like he was already a corpse, just waiting for the body to fall. Kuruk turned to Ellen and spoke rapidly. Maya interrupted, but Ellen held up a hand and silenced both of them. Wesley looked around. The warriors were positioned with purpose, blocking his retreat, watching every breath he took. Smoke shifted beneath him, sensing the tension. "I'm not trying to trick anyone," Wesley said, voice steady. "I helped someone who needed it, that's all." Ellen spoke again, longer this time. "He says, intent is not enough," Maya translated. "A man must live the consequences of his choices, even good ones." Wesley looked at her, and something cracked in his chest. He remembered how cold she'd been, the way her fingers had clutched that blanket, like it was the only thing anchoring her to this world. He hadn't thought about customs or consequences then, just about saving her life. "I'm not your husband," he said slowly, "but I didn't walk away. I chose to help you." Maya stepped closer. "Then prove it." "What?" "To them," she said, nodding toward the warriors. "If you want to leave alive and leave me with my name intact, there's only one way." She took a breath. "You must undergo the trials." He frowned. "Trials?" "3," she said. "The way any outsider proves they mean no harm to our people. Strength, wisdom, and sacrifice." A low murmur passed through the group. Even Kuruk stilled. Wesley looked at Maya again. "And if I refuse?" Her face dropped, but she answered with honesty. "Then you bring shame upon me, and my grandfather would have to restore our honor with blood." He felt the meaning behind the words. This wasn't a threat made from anger. It was obligation, a chain of ancient beliefs passed down longer than any law he knew. Aelin looked at him. No hatred, no cruelty, just expectation. "You'd kill a man for giving someone a blanket?" Wesley asked, half to himself. Maya shook her head. "They would kill a man who walks away from a vow, whether he meant it or not. That's not about hate. It's about keeping balance." Silence hung. Then Wesley nodded, jaw clenched. "Then I don't run. I'll face the trials." Maya turned to Ellen and translated. The old man's gaze didn't waver, but he gave the faintest nod. Another word left his lips, and the warriors around them relaxed. Not all the way, but enough. "He says your words are not the words of a coward," Maya said. "He accepts. But you must come to our village." The youngest warrior, probably not more than 20, stepped forward. Kuruk said something sharp to him, too fast for Wesley to follow. The young man pointed at Wesley's gun, then to the trees. "A warning." Kuruk grunted, clearly displeased, but Elan raised a hand, his voice hard and final. Maya turned. "He says you will not be harmed while you walk with me. But if you flee, Kuruk has the right to hunt you." Wesley met Kuruk's eyes and saw what lay beneath the man's hard exterior. Not rage, but wounded pride and something much darker. He nodded again. "Then I won't run." The group moved slowly into the forest. Wesley walked beside Maya, his boots crunching softly in the snow, his horse trailing behind. No one spoke. Trees swallowed the light, and the trail narrowed. But somewhere deeper in those woods, a village waited, a test, a choice, and maybe something else, because Wesley wasn't just fighting for his life anymore. He was fighting to protect the only person who had ever looked at him like he was something worth remembering. The village appeared like a mirage drawn from stone and smoke. One moment, the path was nothing but tangled pine and brittle silence. The next, the trees opened into a hidden valley cradled between red cliffs where the wind softened and smoke rose in lazy curls from dome-shaped lodges made of mud and branches. Children peeked from behind trees and doorways, their eyes wide and unblinking. Women paused mid-task, hands stilled over grinding stones and cooking fires. A dog barked once, then went quiet. Wesley followed Maya through the center of it all, every step feeling like a crack underfoot. The blanket she wore still hung around her shoulders like a sacred thing, and with each passing face, Wesley felt its weight more than ever. His presence shifted the air. He wasn't a guest. Not yet. He was a question waiting to be answered. They stopped at a large communal fire ring where logs formed a wide circle. In the center stood an old woman, tall and lean, her silver hair braided with turquoise beads. Her face was carved deep with age, but her eyes were sharp as flint. Maya lowered her gaze. My grandmother, she whispered. Her name is Ada. Ada didn't look at Wesley. She looked through him, her expression unreadable. She turned to Ellen, who had followed quietly, and spoke in rapid Navajo, her words clipped, harsh. Several villagers gathered, drawn by the rising tension. Maya didn't translate, but Wesley didn't need the words. Ada was angry. When the old woman's voice dropped, Maya finally spoke. She says I have brought shame to our family by accepting gifts from an outsider, that I've risked our safety by inviting him here. Wesley didn't blame her. From their point of view, he was a stranger, a trespasser, a complication dropped from the white world like a loose match in dry grass. A young man stepped forward from the crowd, tall, lean, with sharp cheekbones and a proud mouth. His eyes locked on Maya, then flicked to Wesley like a blade. "That's Kuruk," Maya said without being asked. Kuruk spoke directly to her, his voice tight, heated. He gestured toward Wesley, then toward the villagers. "He's saying this is all a trick to avoid marrying him," Maya said quietly. "That I brought you here to shame him." Kuruk took a step toward Wesley, one hand resting on the knife at his belt. His English was rough but clear. "You take what is not yours," he said. "White man, leave now, or I will cut out your lying tongue." The threat snapped the circle tighter. Several men reached instinctively for weapons. Women pulled their children back. Even smoke, tied nearby, whinnied and stamped. Wesley stood still, hands at his sides. "I didn't take anything," he said calmly. "I gave something. There's a difference." Kuruk's face darkened. "You gave nothing. You trick sacred ways for your pleasure. Then run back to your people." Before Wesley could respond, Ada stepped between them. Her voice cracked through the tension like a whip. Kuruk froze, teeth clenched, but he backed away, his glare fixed on Wesley like a vow. Ada turned to Maya next, her disappointment colder than snow. Maya stood tall, but her shoulders dropped slightly as her grandmother spoke. When she finished, Maya's voice wavered. "She says I must choose," she said. "Either prove that your intentions are honorable by completing the marriage trials, or admit I was foolish and accept Kuruk's proposal." Wesley blinked. "Marriage trials?" Maya nodded. "3 of them. Strength, wisdom, sacrifice. They are the same trials that have tested our own men for generations." He looked around at the watching faces. Not all hostile, some were curious, even hopeful, but more than a few looked eager for him to fail. Wesley met Maya's eyes. "And if I fail?" She didn't answer, but the silence around them answered for her. Elan stepped forward and spoke with slow authority. Maya translated. "He says the trials begin at sunset. And if you try to leave before they are completed, Kuruk has permission to hunt you." Wesley took a long breath. His ribs ached. His head throbbed from the weight of what he was walking into. But as he looked at Maya, the words came easier than he expected. "Then I guess we'd better get started." The village gathered again that evening. The sun dipped behind the cliffs, casting golden light over the valley. Shadows stretched long as the fire in the central ring was stoked high. Sparks danced into the sky like restless spirits. Elan stepped into the circle holding 3 objects: a thick rope, a carved wooden board covered in symbols, and a small leather pouch that clinked softly. He raised the rope and spoke. Maya stood beside Wesley and explained, "The first trial is strength. You must climb the sacred cliff. There is an eagle's nest near the top. Bring back a feather." Wesley looked up. The cliff loomed behind the village, a jagged wall of red rock rising at least 60 feet. The nest was barely visible near the top, a dark knot of branches wedged between 2 ledges. Maya lowered her voice. "Some have died trying, even our own." Kuruk stepped forward and spat on the ground. He says you'll fall like a stone, Maya said, that your soft hands have never held anything harder than a whiskey bottle. Wesley said nothing. Instead, he stripped off his coat, rolled his sleeves, and approached the rope already tied to a wooden stake at the cliff's base. He tested the line, thick hemp, frayed but strong, and started to climb. The first 20 feet were steady. Years of ranch work had built strength into his arms and shoulders, but the rock was slick, and the wind at that height cut like glass. At 30 feet, a foothold crumbled beneath him. His body swung out, and for a heartbeat, he dangled, helpless. A gasp rippled through the crowd below. He gritted his teeth, ignored the pain in his shoulders, and found new purchase. His hands bled. His breath came sharp. Every muscle screamed. But he kept going. When he reached the nest, a sudden flurry of feathers burst from the shadows. The eagle exploded out with a shriek, talons slicing the air. One claw grazed his shoulder, tearing fabric and skin. Wesley didn't flinch. He spotted a single feather caught in the edge of the nest, golden, long, perfect. He grabbed it and began the descent. Each foot down felt longer than the way up. His vision blurred from blood loss and exhaustion. But when his boots hit the earth again, he didn't fall. He walked back to the fire and held the feather high. The village murmured, surprised. Even Kuruk looked stunned. Elan stepped forward, took the feather, and inspected it. After a long silence, he spoke. Maya smiled. He says the eagle fought you, but you didn't let go. She looked at him, and something soft flickered in her eyes. The first trial is complete, she said. And somewhere behind them, the carved wooden board waited, its symbols flickering in the firelight, and the second trial ready to begin. The fire crackled low, its orange glow licking the carved wood that now sat between Wesley and the gathered village. The second trial had begun. Ellen stepped forward, kneeling beside the board as he spoke in a solemn tone. The wooden slab was about the size of a saddlebag, etched with dozens of ancient symbols, animals, stars, rivers, figures, and coiling spirals. The surface gleamed with oil as though it had been handled for generations. Maya stepped up beside Wesley, her face solemn again. "This is the ancestor stone," she said. "The trial of wisdom." Wesley's jaw tightened. "And what am I supposed to do with it?" "You must solve the riddle," she said. "Before the fire burns to embers, no one can help." "Not even me." He stared at the symbols. They swam in the firelight, flickering with meaning he couldn't read. "What happens if I fail?" She looked at him with honest sorrow in her eyes. "Then you will have failed 2 trials, and if you fail the third, you will not leave here." Wesley nodded slowly, trying to swallow the dryness in his throat. Around the fire, whispers spread among the villagers. Kuruk stood near the back of the circle, arms crossed, eyes sharp, watching. The carved board looked like a puzzle, but it wasn't one he'd ever seen. There was no clear start or finish, no numbers, no instructions, just the shapes, so many of them, drawn in patterns that seemed random. He knelt down, running a calloused finger over the symbols. A bear, an eagle, a snake. Then more, mountains, a figure with arms stretched, lines radiating outward. And at the center, something that looked like a spiral, but broken near the edge. He muttered to himself, "This is insane." But then something clicked. These weren't just drawings, they were stories, representations. He looked again. The bear might be summer, hunting, storing. The eagle, spring, rising, building nests. The snake, autumn, shedding, retreating. There was something cyclical here. The symbols weren't static. They were part of a whole. The spiral, the center, the figure. It wasn't just about nature. It was about people, choices. He looked over his shoulder. The fire was still bright, but the logs were shrinking. Time was running fast. He focused again. The man in the center, lines extending to each animal. This was about relationships. The ways a person reacts to suffering. Bear, take by force. Eagle, fly above it. Snake, shed and move on. And then there was a final symbol, a shape like a folded blanket or a shelter. His chest tightened. That one. That meant giving warmth. It was what he'd done. He stood slowly and turned to Ellen. "I'm ready." The murmurs grew louder, surprised. Kuruk narrowed his eyes, like he'd expected Wesley to fail and wasn't sure how to handle this. Wesley pointed at the board. "These are choices. They're not just animals. They're ways to respond when someone else is suffering." Ellen didn't react, but his eyes locked on Wesley's. He continued, "The bear takes what he wants. The eagle flies away. The snake sheds responsibility and leaves. But the blanket, that symbol right there, that means staying, giving warmth even when it costs you something." He paused. "That's what I did. I didn't plan it. I didn't think it meant anything. But I saw her freezing, and I gave what I had." Maya translated as he spoke, her voice steady, her gaze flicking between her grandfather and Wesley. When she finished, Elan stepped forward, picked up the board, and looked at it for a long time. Then he spoke a few words. Maya turned to Wesley, a slow smile rising on her lips. "He says, you have passed, not because you knew our symbols, but because you understood yourself." The crowd murmured, some with surprise, others with reluctant admiration. Even Ada, the grandmother who had stayed silent since sunset, nodded slowly in her place beside the fire. But Ellen wasn't finished. He picked up the small leather pouch, the third and final object. It jingled with a dull, hollow sound. Maya's expression changed, more serious now. She looked at Wesley, her voice soft. "This is the trial of sacrifice." Wesley straightened. "I just nearly got myself killed climbing a damn cliff and bled all over your sacred rock. What more do they want?" Maya didn't smile. "This isn't about pain. It's about loss. You must give up what you value most." He hesitated. "How would they even know what that is?" "The bones," she said quietly. "They'll show him." Ellen knelt, opened the pouch, and poured its contents onto a buffalo hide laid before the fire. Small, carved finger bones, each etched with symbols, spilled across the leather. He moved them gently into a shape, some sort of configuration, and stared at them for a long moment, reading them the way a preacher might read the sky before a storm. Then he spoke a single sentence. Maya didn't speak immediately. Her lips parted, but she seemed reluctant. "What did he say?" Wesley asked. She looked at him. "He says, you must choose between the three things you value most and surrender one, your freedom, your power, or your past." Wesley's stomach turned. Ellen gestured, to smoke, tied nearby, to the revolver on Wesley's hip, then to Wesley's shirt pocket, where the corner of an old photograph barely peeked out. Maya continued, voice just above a whisper. "Your horse, your freedom, your gun, your protection, and that photo, that's your past, the family you lost, the man you were." The fire popped sharply. Everyone waited. Kuruk stepped forward, voice dripping with disdain. "He won't give up anything. Not for her." Others murmured in agreement. Wesley looked down at the photograph. He pulled it slowly from his pocket. His parents stared back at him, his father serious-eyed and distant, his mother with the hint of a smile. That picture had survived dust storms, rain, gunfights. He hadn't spent a night without it near his heart in 20 years. His hand trembled. But then he looked at Maya, She wasn't pleading. She wasn't even looking at the photo. She was just watching him, with hope, yes, but something more painful too. Responsibility. He walked to the fire, knelt beside the coals and stared into them. The heat brushed his skin. "I give up the man I was," he said quietly. Then he laid the photo into the fire. The flames caught quickly, the edges curled, blackened. His mother's smile turned to smoke, and Wesley didn't look away. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Even Kuruk looked shaken. Maya's eyes filled, but she didn't cry. Ellen stepped forward. He spoke again, voice low and reverent. Maya translated, "He says, you have passed, not because you burned a piece of paper, but because you gave up something no one else could see but you." Ada stood then, moving forward with a bundle in her hands. She handed it to Wesley, a new shirt, soft deerskin with turquoise stitching. He took it carefully. She says, "Welcome to the family." Wesley looked at Maya, and for the first time, she smiled, not out of relief, but something deeper. The third trial was over, but what came next would ask even more from them both. Wesley woke before dawn. The lodge was quiet, except for the slow, steady crackle of the fire dying in the hearth. He sat up on the mat of woven hides, the new deerskin shirt draped over his shoulders, still carrying the scent of smoke and sage. It fit well, better than anything he'd worn in years, and yet he still felt like an imposter in it, like a stranger wearing borrowed skin. The trials were over. He'd done what no outsider had done in decades, and still he wasn't sure what he'd become. Outside, the village stirred. Low voices murmured. Smoke trailed from cooking fires. The world moved on, as if nothing had changed. And maybe, for them, it hadn't. But for Wesley, the past 3 days had cracked something open inside him, something he'd buried so deep it felt foreign now. He stepped out into the crisp morning air. Frost clung to the grass. Maya was there, kneeling by the fire, grinding corn into meal. She looked up when she saw him, and her smile came soft and natural, like she'd been waiting. "Did you sleep?" she asked. "Not really," he said, rubbing the back of his neck. She handed him a bowl of hot mash. Simple, warm, nourishing. He ate in silence while Maya sat beside him. After a few minutes, she spoke. "You passed, Wesley. My people have accepted you. My grandfather gave you his blessing. Even Ada gave you the shirt." Wesley nodded. "And what does that mean exactly? Am I married to you now?" Maya looked into the fire. "Not yet. But you could be." He glanced at her, unsure of how to respond. She continued, voice calm. "Tradition says we should take time, let the spirit settle, let the trials speak. If you wish, you can leave today and no one will stop you. Your honor has been restored. I will keep my name. My family will hold no shame." Wesley let the silence stretch between them. He didn't want to leave, not because of guilt or pride or obligation, but because somewhere in the middle of climbing cliffs and burning memories, something had begun to shift inside him. The way Maya had watched him, the way she'd spoken with both pride and pain, he hadn't been looked at like that in years, not with expectation, but with belief. "I don't want to leave," he said finally. "Not if you don't want me to." She turned, eyes searching his. "Why?" He thought a moment, then answered, "Because when I was out there alone, I never knew what I was missing. But being here, with you, I feel like maybe I've finally got something worth staying for." She smiled again, this time fuller, deeper. "Then stay, and let us find what this can become." The moment held steady, neither rushed nor broken, just two people sitting by a fire, no longer strangers. Later that morning, Ellen called a gathering. The village came together near the council fire. Kuruk stood off to the side, arms crossed, eyes cold, but unreadable. Ada stood behind Elan, her hands folded, face impassive. Wesley and Maya sat together. The fire crackled as Elan spoke, his tone rich with ceremony. Maya translated as he went. He says the trials are complete. You acted with strength, spoke with wisdom, and gave with sacrifice. You have honored our ways. Wesley lowered his head, both humbled and heavy. Maya continued, He says, if you choose to stay, you will be given a place among us, not as a visitor, but as one of the people. Ellen turned to Maya, his expression softening. He spoke briefly, then stepped back. Maya smiled. He gives his blessing. If we wish to speak vows, we may, but not today. There is time. Then Ada stepped forward. The old woman moved slowly, each step deliberate. She carried something wrapped in a red cloth. When she reached Wesley, she unwrapped it, a carved flute, old and worn smooth by use. She placed it in his hands without a word. Maya whispered, It belonged to my grandfather's brother. He died in the last great war. Ada has kept it all these years. She offers it to you. It means they see you as family. Wesley swallowed hard. He didn't know what to say, so he just nodded and held the flute with both hands like it was made of glass. The rest of the day passed in quiet celebration. Food was shared. Children laughed. A few of the older men came to shake his hand or nod their respect. Even Kuruk didn't speak another word, though his eyes burned with something unresolved. That evening, as the sky turned gold and purple, Wesley and Maya walked beyond the village. They found a ridge that looked out over the valley. Below, the smoke from the lodges curled like rivers in the air. Wesley sat down on a flat rock. Maya joined him. I didn't think this would happen, he said softly. Neither did I, she replied. But sometimes the things we never meant to do become the most important. He nodded. That blanket. I didn't understand what it meant to you. I just knew you were freezing, and I couldn't let you die. Maya looked at him, her gaze deep and unflinching. You saw me, not as Apache, not as a burden, just me. Wesley ran a hand through his hair, wind brushing his skin. You asked me if I regret it. Back when this all started, she nodded. Do you? He took a long breath. No. I regret not knowing sooner what I really had to give, that it wasn't just a blanket. It was a piece of my life. And somehow, giving it to you gave me something back I didn't even know I lost. Maya smiled, then leaned her head gently against his shoulder. They sat that way as night fell. The stars blinked into place above them, and the firelight below grew softer. Tomorrow would come with questions, with choices, with whatever came next. But tonight, they simply breathed the same air. Two people from different worlds, finding at last the beginning of one. The morning air was warmer than it had been in days, carrying the scent of pine and wood smoke as the first rays of sunlight painted the valley in amber light. Wesley stood near the edge of the village, watching the sun rise over the distant ridge. The blanket, the same one he had given Maya, was now wrapped around his shoulders. The fabric had come full circle, worn thin in places, but heavier now with meaning. Behind him, the village stirred. Children's laughter broke the quiet. Chickens clucked in low wooden pens. The rhythm of life continued, and he was no longer just an outsider watching from the edge. He turned when he heard soft footsteps on the earth. Maya approached with a small clay mug in her hands, steam curling up from the rim. It's pine tea, she said. My grandmother made it. Wesley took the mug and smiled. "It's better than Murphy's coffee," she chuckled. "Almost everything is." They stood together for a moment, looking out at the horizon. "Do you miss your old life?" she asked. He thought about it, really thought. The long trails, the endless towns that all looked the same, the silence that used to feel like peace but now seemed hollow. "I think I used to," he said slowly. "But now, it feels like a memory that belonged to someone else." Maya nodded. "Sometimes that's how you know it's time to begin again." They walked together through the village. People nodded to him now, not just out of politeness, but with familiarity. A man offered him a piece of smoked venison. A young boy ran past and grinned at him. Even Ada, standing outside her lodge brushing herbs, gave him a curt but respectful nod. As they passed the lodge circle, Elan waited near the council fire. He raised a hand and called Wesley forward. "He wants to speak with you," Maya said. Wesley approached, feeling the weight of it in his chest. Elan sat on a low stool carved from cedar, the same one he had used during the trials. Through Maya, he spoke. "He says you have walked an unexpected road, and that you have done so with humility, that your feet did not belong here when you arrived, but your heart found its place." Wesley listened quietly, eyes never leaving Ellen's. "He says you are not required to stay. You are free now. But if you do stay, you must not live with one foot in the past and one in the present. You must be here completely, or not at all." The words sank deep. Wesley took a breath and looked around, at the lodges, at the trees, at the land that had nearly killed him and yet saved him just the same. He thought of the fire where he burned his parents' photo, of the climb, the eagle's scream, the warmth of the blanket when he wrapped it around Maya's shoulders. "I want to stay," he said, "not out of debt, not because I have nowhere else to go, but because I finally feel like I belong." Maya translated, and Elon gave a small, satisfied nod. He placed a hand on Wesley's shoulder and said something softly. "He says, then you are one of us now." As they left the fire circle, Wesley felt something inside him settle, like a long, wandering river, finally emptying into still water. Later that afternoon, Wesley helped repair one of the animal pens, working beside two young men who barely spoke English but laughed often and worked hard. They didn't ask questions. They didn't test him. They simply handed him tools and worked alongside him like he'd been there all along. Kuruk passed by once, carrying a bow and a full quiver. He paused briefly, then gave Wesley a single curt nod before disappearing into the trees. Wesley didn't need anything more than that. When the sun dipped low again, Maya found him sitting beneath the cedar tree near the cliff, the same cliff he'd climbed during the first trial. She sat beside him, without a word, pulling her knees to her chest. "There's something I've been meaning to ask you," Wesley said after a while. Maya glanced over. "What's that?" "The day I gave you that blanket, did you know what it would mean? What it would lead to?" She looked out toward the horizon. "Yes. And no. I knew what the act meant in my people's eyes, but I didn't know what it would mean for you, or for me." She paused, her voice quiet. "But when you didn't take it back, I hoped." He let the silence fall again, but it wasn't heavy. It was full, like soil, rich with things growing beneath it. "I don't know if I'll ever understand all the ways this world works," Wesley said, "but I know this. If I had the chance to do it all again, I'd still wrap that blanket around you." Maya reached over, laced her fingers through his. "And I'd still keep it." As the stars came out, the village began to sing. Low, rhythmic chants that rose and fell like the breath of the land itself. Maya hummed along softly, eyes closed. Wesley leaned back against the tree, the air cool on his face, the sounds of life all around him. He'd come here by accident, stayed because of duty, but he would remain because of something much stronger. Not obligation, not tradition, love, not the loud, fiery kind. But something slower, truer, the kind that grew in silence, in hard choices, in broken men learning how to become whole again. As the firelight flickered below, Maya rested her head against his shoulder, and Wesley closed his eyes. He no longer dreamed of leaving, because everything worth finding was already here.